Hello, welcome back to another edition of Higher Education Today. I'm your host, Steven Roy Goodman. Today we're going to be talking about safe spaces on campuses and around campuses throughout the United States. We're going to be interviewing a number of students from various universities and colleges, including Sarah Lawrence College and New York University. So have a look, and we're going to be talking about safe spaces on campus. I'm here with Glazer, who is at Sarah Lawrence College and is going to be talking about safe spaces, but Ami works at the Tea House at Sarah Lawrence College.
Okay, well, the Tea House is basically this little hut where people can come and buy tea or coffee or pastries and just hang out and listen to music. And it's a safe space, so everyone is supposed to come and respect the people that they're sharing the space with, and there's no hate speech allowed. And it's just nice because it's not, I think there is it's really good to have exclusive safe spaces, so spaces that are exclusive for people of color, for queer people or whatever. But I think it's also really great to have safe spaces that are inclusive and diverse, where people of all these different backgrounds can come together and share their experiences and learn from each other and accept the ways that they differ and the ways that they disagree. And I think that's a really nice thing about the Tea House. And I don't know, I think that can't really exist outside, that can't really exist in a space like a dormitory or a classroom, because at the Tea House you're coming in and you're agreeing to that, and that's kind of, you're all agreeing to that upon entering the space, and I don't think that everyone agrees to that when they enter the university in general.
I'm here with Chuck Lesnick, the former city council president of Yonkers, New York. Chuck, welcome.
Good to see you, Steve. It's been a while.
It's been a while, Chuck. Well, thank you, and a special thanks to your neighbors at Sarah Lawrence College who've really made this all happen.
Sarah Lawrence College of Yonkers. They may say they're in Bronxville. That's what the post office says, but they're in Yonkers.
Well, you'll have to talk with the administrators at Sarah Lawrence about that. But today, we're going to talk about safe spaces and the concept not just of safe spaces at Sarah Lawrence, but also safe spaces around the country. What do you think about the concept of safe spaces on college campuses?
You know, 30 years ago, if we had had this conversation at Yale, I probably would have said, you know, the First Amendment is so sacrosanct that it allows the Nazis to march through Skokie, Illinois. And as long as you're not yelling fire in a crowded movie theater, then there should be no limits. But I think over time, I've spoken to people, a lot of young people, about post-traumatic stress and other things that really trigger bad reactions in people. And if elite colleges are going to reach out and have diversity, which they should do, then I think they have to accommodate the people that they're coming in and their experiences. So I think that to the extent that speech can harm people, and it does have the ability to harm people, that it should be protected, and people should have the safe space so they can not fear going into class because somebody's going to say something that's going to trigger them.
Well, but the issue that we've come across in discussing this is, why do we need a physical safe space beyond just the classroom?
Well, the campus has traditionally been a place where you can express your ideas and explore your ideas, and you have a lot of young, impressionable people. So whether it's in the classroom or on the campus, I think people have the right to exist without fear of being harassed.
Well, I think that's true. In my view, though, the question is whether or not we need a physical safe space on a campus to make that happen.
I think society is changing, and maybe the country should be a safe space. I mean, we certainly have free speech. We have people who are running for elected office these days that are pushing the limits of free speech, and some things that come out are construed as hateful and offensive. It may be different in a political context because, you know, you have the right to tune on Fox or CNN or MSNBC or even this show and listen or don't listen. But in a campus environment where you've signed up to go to school and you're learning about literature, you're learning about biology, and then people come in with things that are hurtful, I think that shouldn't be. I mean, if somebody wants to be an idiot and say the world is flat, it isn't round, then I guess they have the right to say that. That doesn't hurt somebody. They may be wrong. But if somebody uses words that trigger different reactions or minimize people that have already marginalized experiences, those people deserve to be protected.
And I guess my follow-up to that would be the issue of professors. How do professors know what might traumatize somebody?
Well, the notion of triggers is just to give a warning. Every time I turn on HBO, it always says, the following the program has violence or language or nudity or something like that. They're telling you what to expect, so that if you don't want to watch, you don't watch. And if somebody doesn't want to hear a word that makes them uncomfortable, then they can choose to leave. They can choose to have a dialogue with the professor about using an alternative word. Ultimately, if the professor insists on doing a certain thing, you take a different class. It's the free marketplace of ideas, but at least you've been warned.
Well, what about in the political context? And I don't mean to put you on the spot in your role as a public official, but let's assume somebody came to a city council meeting or some other venue and they were offended by something that you or one of your colleagues did. How would you react to that?
Well, they often were offended by what I did, and they protested, and they had their 3 minutes to speak. In all my years on the city council, we only threw one person out of chambers, and he used to actually come and sing his critique. And then one day he stopped singing. We actually heard what he was saying, and it was tremendously offensive. So we gave him a couple of warnings. We told him what he couldn't say. He persisted on crossing the line, and then we had him removed.
And if I could ask you about the campus community per se. You made the case, and I think it was an interesting point about the tea house being a special place, but isn't a university supposed to be this place where people are supposed to be able to talk about ideas in a free and open way in the first place?
Yeah, but I think that that's not always the case. I think that sometimes people are shut down when people treat them disrespectfully in the classroom. I think that and I think that sometimes that can be pushed too much in the university when you're saying that that it's supposed to be a space for free speech to learn, and then there are places like University of Chicago where I think that is taken too far, and they don't account for how the way that they're utilizing their free speech can affect other people.
What do you mean by that? How free speech affects other people?
Well, I think that if you're using words that are harmful to other people, I think that makes it a harder space for them to learn in and a harder space for them to grow in. And so I don't know. So I think there is kind of like this line that I don't think universities always understand between free speech and between using free speech as something to help people and as something to continue this kind of toxic environment where people aren't comfortable learning because of people using words that are triggering to them, or using and implementing ideas that kind of make them feel unsafe in their learning environment.
We're continuing our discussion about safe spaces with Peter Waldheim, who's a graduate of the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee and a veteran of the civil rights movement. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you.
Well, Peter, if you could say a word or two about safe spaces and what they mean to you.
Well, as I understand safe spaces, students, or at least some students, some activist students, want to carve out areas within a campus where they're never disturbed or perturbed by any idea, notion, practice that doesn't agree with them. And this is, I think, very different than what those of us in my generation fought for. You look at somebody like Mariel, who led the free speech movement at Berkeley. Mariel had been a freedom rider in Mississippi in 1964, and then he came back, and the campus at Berkeley had said there can be no political fundraising, no political activity on campus. Well, he was trying to raise money to support the freedom riders, and support the civil rights movement, and therefore the free speech movement was born and encapsulated the country. That's very different from what's going on now, where it's, I don't want to come in contact with any idea that causes me to think or challenges my ideas.
But do you think that's really what it's about, that people are afraid of being challenged by ideas, or they just want some space away from being challenged from those ideas?
Well, I think that they want to eliminate the competition of ideas on campus, which is extraordinarily dangerous, particularly on the campus, which has always been the sort of petri dish for freedom of thought in our country. They don't want teachers teaching who are going to challenge their ideas. They don't want to read books. They don't want courses offered that are going to challenge their ideas. This is a country, our country, which has always had significant debates since the beginning of the country. Who is a person and who is a citizen, and what is the role of faith, and what is our tolerance for it. They're not carrying on that tradition. They're challenging that tradition.
Well, let's say a student were to say, well, we are carrying on that tradition in a different way, in a different generation, in a different manner. How would you respond to that?
Well, doing the opposite of what one says one's doing is not really just carrying on a different tradition. It reminds me of the old quote Trotsky said about the great social critic Dwight MacDonald: everyone deserves the right to be stupid, but some people abuse the privilege. And I think that fits here.
Well, fair enough. You made the case before we started chatting today about the kind of going back to the womb. What did you mean by that?
Well, traditionally, people who wanted to challenge social order took on the issues. We didn't run away from them. We didn't cower from them. We took them on. We recognized that they were out there. We challenged the ideas. We were willing to go to jail for it. We were willing to suffer penalties for it. We weren't. I remember a story I read. I think it was last year, about some students at one campus who called the police because they had detected a microaggression because some other students had chalked the word Trump on the sidewalk. That is a level of, cowardice that is not understandable to me.
What would you like to say about safe spaces and whether or not it's a good idea?
I think they provide a really just open space for all walks of life, just all kinds of people from all over, just for everyone. I didn't really know about them before I went to Sarah Lawrence, and that was really awesome because I come from Florida, so the town I grew up, we didn't really have safe spaces like that. So that was really nice to hear that there was just a space for everybody. You guys?
Similarly, I also come from a safe space where there are not really sort of even really tools for transgender people or queer people in general to really kind of come together in a community base. And so I truly believe that people who are of a particular walk of life or who are like-minded tend to want to group together because you find that commonality. But what makes it more, I personally think what makes it fantastic for a learning environment is when colleges and schools foster those environments, because it just makes those students have a space where they can go and they can feel accepted, and it really translates into them doing better in school, I think.
I mean, I think safe spaces are essential. And I came from the San Francisco Bay Area, so my whole childhood was kind of in its own sort of safe space. But even within that, we would have safe spaces. I ran this GSA, the Gay Straight Alliance, at my high school, and there were people who would only be out in that space. They could only talk to people within their community in that space. And so to kind of eliminate a place where people can, become a community together is ridiculous. And also what you said about how we kind of flock together, that's absolutely true. If I look at my friends, I'm Jewish, a lot of my friends are Jewish. I'm queer, a lot of my friends are queer, and it's fine to branch out of that, but it is just so nice to not have to explain yourself to anybody, to just have somewhere where you can just be among people who kind of grew up like you did or kind of had experiences like you did. I mean, it's also, I understand why people eliminate safe spaces. I understand the whole idea that we need to get you ready for the real world, but the real world still has safe spaces. The real world still has gay bars, and it still has your home. Like, it still has places like Afro-punk festivals, places where you can go and enjoy just being yourself and just being among people who are like you. And the idea that we need to get kids desensitized to that, the idea that we need to have kids all ready to go out in the world to be sad and kind of deal with small microaggressions and oppression all the time is ridiculous and condescending. And it isn't about trigger warning in literally every single conversation. It's really about having the ability to take a break. And yeah, so I find it really, really frustrating when people kind of talk about us as a generation that's really soft. We're going to be happier and better for it, I think.
Well, what if a person is genuinely offended by something that you say? What do you want them to do?
I want them to challenge the idea. There is no guarantee of that's the back to the womb notion, that you're going to live life in absolute tranquility and no one's ever going to challenge you. We are all challenged. It doesn't matter what faith you are, what political ideas you have. I mean, we all get challenged at some point. And knowing how to stand up and fight for your principles is definitely part of the social contract, if you will, that colleges have with their students and with their teachers. We talk about safe spaces for students. What about safe spaces for teachers? Teachers are being confronted by a sort of a doctrinaire notion coming from extreme elements of the left, that they can't present ideas that might be bothersome to some students. That's an impossible standard to meet if we want to uphold the rights of free expression, freedom of speech, and competing ideas.
Well, could you say a little bit more about the freedom of expression for teachers?
Well, there have been examples. I don't know the examples off the top of my head, but Yale University was the most publicized recently, where a faculty member had sent an email suggesting that the university didn't need to tell students what to wear and what not to wear for Halloween costumes. And this resulted in enormous upheaval on the part of some of the activist students, who then challenged this professor and her husband, who was also a professor, and tried to get them fired and did get them removed as, I can't remember what the title was, but whatever role they played within the specific houses that they served. So if you're a professor who's teaching sociology, or you're a professor who's teaching women's studies issues, or about the civil rights movement, or any number of things, you have to watch very carefully what you say, what ideas you express. There's a difference between the most extreme notions, the idea that you would get up and call for violence against groups, versus those who say, there's some challenges here that we need to discuss.
Well, but let's say you're an administrator at a university. Let's say it's Sarah Lawrence College, or let's say it's New York University or somewhere else. And there might be a dynamic tension between what students want, the faculty wants, and parents want. How would you resolve that in terms of, because you have different constituency groups?
Well, there are different constituency groups, but I would suggest that the way of solving it is not to pick between the groups that are, applying pressure or demanding support for their position. It's to adopt principles. It's to endorse principles that are part of what the great Nobel Nobel Prize winner Gunnar Myrdal had called the American Creed, and that was, in his opinion, that America had always been involved with, had always supported ideas that were democratic, a society that was liberal, a society that was individualistic, and a society that was egalitarian. But that's being challenged by people that are definitely not, that are sort of anti-democratic, anti-egalitarian, it's all the antis, anti-individualistic. They don't support any of those notions. And anti-liberal. President Kennedy said, a liberal society is a free society. Maybe it was a free society, a liberal society, one or the other. But today we're being confronted with ideas that you should see the lexicon that they use on campus these days. I mean, one of my favorites has always been the other kind, which are the people who say that they have the bodies of humans, but they are partially or totally alien subjects. I mean, they're not human, they're non-humans. Although I will admit that hearing the logic of some of these groups, they may have a point.
Well, I guess one other thing, if I may ask, is the issue of silencing. You seem to be perfectly willing to chat about this in a public setting. But a lot of people claim that they don't have the ability to speak publicly, that they're afraid of speaking publicly. How would you address that?
And with good reason. There will be often organized groups coming at them and demanding that they be removed from positions, demanding that they be fired, demanding that they be silenced, various levels of sanctions. And that's always been a problem in American society, whether we were talking about the House Un-American Activities days back in the 20s or something, or you're talking about the McCarthy tyranny, or you're talking about the kind of tyranny that's now coming from the left, not the right. It's the same. The issue is the principle, and having the same standards for everybody, regardless of whether they're on the left, the right, up or down, black or white. It doesn't matter. We are a country that believes in. This is a country that was based on ideas. It wasn't based on just square footage, and part and parcel of those ideas is this notion of freedom.
So what I would like to see, what I would advocate, is that instead of framing these as safe spaces, that they're sort of training grounds. They're places where people who are suffering post-traumatic stress syndrome can certainly be empathized with, but also can discover their strength. They can learn courage. So that they can come into that space, go through whatever process, and I think there are effective processes, to discover their strength, develop tactics for dealing with whatever, criticism, abuse, exploitation, go out and give it a go, and come back and learn more techniques.
We are continuing our discussion about safe spaces with two Sarah Lawrence students, Kenjo and Karen. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, if you wouldn't mind saying a word or two about what you think about safe spaces and whether or not you think it's a good idea.
Okay, I'll start. I guess for me, safe spaces are not an easy thing to accomplish, and so I don't think there is necessarily something that a wholesome safe space, basically. I don't think it's very possible to really achieve that, but I do think it is important in education to try. And the reason I say that is because I think for me, safe spaces there should be a cultivation of safe spaces on campuses for students of oppressed minorities or of oppressed identities in general. I think that's really important for students who are, of a different race or a different class, or who identify as a different gender that's not like male. I think it's really important to cultivate these safe spaces for students who are affected in daily life by oppression to kind of have a way to learn and fulfill their, fulfillment for their educational journeys. I don't know if it is very possible. If once that safe space gets dismantled, I don't really know how a student would be able to learn in a way that is comfortable for them, or not even comfortable, but actually productive for them. And that's why I think safe spaces are really important, but I also think that, I think it's also important to know it's very difficult to achieve them, but it's important to try.
Right. I also think that, while I mostly agree, I think that the tricky thing with safe spaces is people tend to conflate the idea of safe space and comfortable spaces. Mm-hmm. I don't think safe spaces necessarily mean your point of view is not challenged, your argument is not challenged. I don't think it means it doesn't make you a critical person. I think safe spaces has a lot to do with freedom of expressions, right? And so that goes beyond just saying whatever you want to say, but it also comes into mind about how we think about the world and how we think about power operates around the world, right? So like we have power imbalances. So when you have a popular discourse, let's say a race discourse that's been talked about a lot, to create a safe space is to make sure that it gets neutralized. And so the same sort of hate rhetoric that comes with race doesn't get say in the same context, in the same setting. So that's what makes a space safe, just because both now, to be free, both now has equal sort of power dynamics, so that the conversation can go much more productive and much more sort of like inclusive to everybody. And that goes along to like question of gender as well. And so like I feel like a lot of the rhetoric against safe spaces is sort of like mixing up the idea with sort of comfortable spaces where like, oh, everyone is trying to be political correct now, and so that means like a lot of point of views don't get sort of isn't sort of contested, isn't sort of like being critically thought against. And so that is a problem to worry about in our sort of current academic situations. But I don't think that's necessarily true, because yes, there's a lot of times by being politically correct, you are trying to remain comfortable in sort of like discussion that you hear in school without being critically thinking about those process. But that itself is very different from the nature of what safe space is trying to go for, which is trying to say like, hey, historically there is power imbalances between this community.
Thank you for watching. We hope you've enjoyed this special edition of Higher Education Today. If you would like additional information about Sarah Lawrence College, please visit sarahlawrence.edu. If you would like additional information about New York University, please visit nyu.edu. And if you would like to send a comment to our viewer mailbox, please do so at highereducationtoday@topcolleges.com. Thank you again for watching. I'm Steven Roy Goodman, and you've been watching Higher Education Today.